Welcome to the TJ Malden Leadership Podcast, where we talk about life, leadership, and the gospel.
Hey, welcome to the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, we always talk about life, leadership, and the gospel. Today, I have with me a very special guest, Trey Lancaster. Trey is going to tell us about his life today. And why is that significant? He and his family live in Zimbabwe. All right, Trey is a missionary for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And today, Trey, first, thank you so much, man, for hanging out with me and just being willing to come and talk about your life. I want to start it a little different. If you would you just tell me kind of how you came to faith in Jesus, like your or kind of the origins of your faith story?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, come on.
Well, first off, TJ, it's just awesome to be here. But yeah, starting back in Eatonton, Georgia, that's where I grew up. And so I grew up going to church, went to First Baptist Church, Eatonton, Georgia. And, I grew up hearing about the gospel. I grew up hearing about the Bible. And at 8 years old, I remember just kind of a specific call to, any of those that would come after Christ. And I just remember thinking, even at 8 years old, and God was even working on my heart just with the people that he was putting into my life. I remember there was a guy that I was interacting with just at 8 that had Down syndrome, and God just kind of softened my heart with that. It was kind of I can't describe it, but I just remember in that moment, he was kind of softening my heart, and it just kind of made my ears more just open to the gospel. And I was just very accepting of that moment. So
you were 8 years old when you came to faith. I was 8 years old.
Okay. Yeah. So I was baptized, and I had some men starting to pour into my life. But as any other person, life happens. Sure. You go into your teenage years, you go into your college years, and your high school years, and you begin to look back at that, and you're like, was I really saved then?
I got you.
And so by God's grace, I can feel like that there was many tempting times in my life, but God would put the right person in my life to help disciple me or to help me to come out of things. There was sin that I faced, but those never had just a chain on me. I feel like that I was able to overcome those things. There was a lot of temptation. There was a lot of downs. Yeah. But Christ was the thing that always pulled me out of those things. And I feel like when I actually came to Tifton, Georgia, my freshman year of ABAC, it was kind of, I was like at this crossroads, like, am I going to be living for Christ or am I going to be living for me? I didn't really see it that way, but that was what was laid out in front of me. And I think that by God's grace, I was able to walk down that path of living for Christ, and I was able to get involved with, Bible studies, First Baptist Church of Tifton here, and then also...
Yeah, you were involved in a small group here, or a Sunday school class small group here. But again, so if you guys have been watching the podcast, you know that Nick, who's been on before, Nick goes to ABAC. And when we say ABAC, it's Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College here in Tifton, Georgia. It's known kind of around the world for like turf grass. So Trey, you came to ABAC, and ABAC is kind of the place where you kind of got on fire about your faith, and where you even started serving. Yeah. And this is a part of your story. I want to jump to small group discipleship and what a local body meant to you before entering into the mission field. But before we do that, there's a story, and I was so looking forward to you being on today because this story is a story that I use, and I don't want to get it wrong. I might have told it wrong. Like it might have been like the 10-inch fish that turned into the 50-pound fish. I don't know if I've storied you that way, but when you came to ABAC, you were following Jesus and beginning to be serious about your faith, but you decided to, you linked your life kind of with Young Life, which is a parachurch ministry that points teenagers, high schoolers to Jesus. It kind of meets them where they are in their circles. And one of the encouragements of Young Life is become a coach, substitute teacher, do something where you're putting your life, you're intentionally putting your life, alongside the life of students so that you can become friends with them and disciple them and point them to Jesus and be a Christian example. Tell me what you did at a school here to do that. Didn't you
Yeah,
tell me.
When I got here, I really got on fire for Christ, and I knew that it wasn't just about me sitting in a church and just being poured in. I knew I needed to be pouring out into others. And so guy, Pat Tolley, was big into Young Life and was like, dude, I think you'd be awesome at serving in this ministry. And so basically what it is what you said, plugging into a school and just finding a way to get into kids' lives and to tell them about Jesus, just looking for that door. So I began to serve with Young Life, became coach, and, began to find ways to just get into the school. It started with sports, and I would just go and run practice with the cross-country guys, and then it eventually turned into a job, and I became a janitor and was there and just serving alongside and just looking for ways, I'm scrubbing toilets and then talking to high school kids. Some kids probably saw me as creepy, but, I'm looking for a way to just get into kids' lives and just to tell them about the gospel. And so what that kind of looked like was forming a relationship, texting them, seeing how things are going. And when things are getting tough, like being able to pour into them, meeting weekly and just kind of reading through a book of the Bible and just,
And so when you say meeting weekly, you were a groups leader basically, right? Weren't you like a small groups leader for Young Life? One of my favorite things about that portion of your story and the gospel and Young Life and just serving in general is like we always kind of paint it like, oh, if I'm going to tell the story of Jesus or if I'm going to serve people or love people, it's got to be from a stage or it's got to be from some vocational ministry. Even like I've got to be a missionary and go to Zimbabwe.
Exactly, man.
I do this, but what I love is like, no, like your local, like if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm not quote unquote an influencer or some leader. I'm a clerk at the store or I'm a server at a restaurant or I'm a janitor at a school. What I love about your story is like you rob the excuses from everybody. You know what I'm saying? Like, because it's like, well, no. Like some of my most influential discipleship was when I was a janitor at a school here in Tifton. Like that's when I was pouring into students. And so I love that your story images for us and stories to us that you can be from anywhere, any walk of life, doing any job and still be someone who disciples.
No, that's exactly right, TJ. And so, I mean, one thing that I feel like God just put on my heart constantly was that like God just uses the ordinary and makes us extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm just constantly reminded that, like, just your mundane routine of life, like, use it for the glory of Him. Like, yes, there are particular people that are called to be on a stage, and there's some people called to be, missionaries or church planters, but God needs all of us to be in this boat. Like, we're all called to be disciple makers.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Man, that's awesome. Okay, so in the process of this, you're, and I'm just letting people get to know you, right? In the process of your discipleship, in the process of you serving in Young Life, you and Caitlin, your wife is named Caitlin, and you have, remind me of your kids' names one more time.
No, it's okay,
Rayford, Rayford's your oldest, so
yes, that's
you've got Rayford and
Rents, and then Lawton is our youngest
Lawton
little girl.
Is your little girl.
So 2 boys and a little girl.
So, and you and Caitlin have been married
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, this past May.
So she was kind of your partner through a lot of this. Like
Absolutely.
she was with you. She was your, y'all were best friends, just doing life here in Tifton as you were discipling other people.
That's right.
So how did y'all meet?
Yeah, so we met through a friend of mine, my roommate, and they went to high school together.
Okay.
And so she was going to school in Macon, Georgia, and we started to date through our college years.
Cool.
So we kind of did a little bit of long distance, but as soon as we graduated, we got married in May of 2012.
Okay, so so I want to ask this, but what did she think like when you were like, hey, Caitlin, listen, I feel like God's calling me to serve students, and I'm going to go be a janitor so I can share the gospel with students. What was her response?
So we were married when I was the janitor. The janitor part kind of came with, I'm looking for a way to plug into students, but it was also like, I need to be working. And,
Yeah,
I've always had
yeah.
a job kind of throughout, but I was like, this will be kind of two birds with one stone. I need to be working, but this will be a way that I can continue to do that. And so I knew that that's what I wasn't going to be doing forever, but it was for a season and I wanted to do it well.
Gotcha.
And so she was completely on board with it. It came to a point where we've kind of phased out of serving students, but discipleship started in other places.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when you were here and you were on board with discipleship, what was the moment? Because you and Caitlin, when I came to Tifton, you guys were, you started to be a part of discipleship and growing in your faith and young married couple, right?
Yeah.
What was the moment for you that you felt like, okay, I've been serving, I've kind of like been out of the box in the way that I'm going to engage students and share the gospel. What was the moment like? Can you walk me through because we're going to get to the point of like your missionary journey, like you living in Zimbabwe and what you actually do there and how you and Caitlin serve with your family. But I want to hear about the moment, like what led you to this point, to this moment where you're like, I am going to uproot my family and my entire life, and I'm going to another culture, another place, and I'm abandoning the American dream in a sense for the sake of the gospel. What was that moment? Was it a crescendo, like these little things that build into this crescendo of the gospel, this gospel clarity moment? Or was it like lightning bolt, kind of Martin Luther thing, like lightning bolt off a horse and it's like, hey, you're going to follow me?
100% crescendo, just like small little steps. So if you allow me, I'll go back kind of before we were married. So this time that I was in Tifton while we were dating, Caitlin was very involved in her church at Ingleside Baptist Church in Macon, Georgia. I was involved with Baptist Collegiate Ministries, Young Life, and also the church here. And during that time, I went on several short-term mission trips, went down to short-term mission trips after Hurricane Katrina hit, went to short-term mission trips after the earthquake in Haiti hit, and we did some disaster relief stuff. But as I was doing these things, I feel like God started really tugging on my heart. And so this is while Caitlin and I were dating. Caitlin also took some short-term mission trips separately from me down to Peru and then also to Haiti as well. And then after we got married, we did a short-term mission trip to Jamaica. Remind me that place's name again.
American Caribbean Experience
That's
is what they call it.
ACE.
It's ACE.
Yes.
So
Yeah. So-
St. Mary, Jamaica. Yeah.
So the Lord, like before we got married, like was tugging on our heartstrings, just like, like it was something like I could see us doing this and kind of with our giftings and stuff. And I'll explain on that more. But it was like the Lord was kind of drawing us into that. But it was something that never really went away, and it just kept growing and growing. After Caitlin and I got married, we were still here in Tifton, Georgia, and she got her master's in ag leadership and education at the UGA campus.
Okay.
My degree was in diversified agriculture at ABAC. I got my bachelor's there. And so for 2 years, I just worked at Trias Ag Group with Mr. Charles Taylor and Nick Taylor.
Yeah.
So we served there, and I worked there, and Caitlin got her master's degree. But the Lord was still really tugging on this. I knew that, like, me working in the ag field or just being a farmer for the rest of my life wasn't what God was calling me to do, but I didn't know exactly what he wanted us to do.
Okay.
So we were praying and praying. We were on our knees praying about it. And so Caitlin and I are newly married, and one thing that I wanted to just like get a little sidetrack note was so thankful for First Baptist Tifton investing in us, especially in the Sunday school classes. Being newly married, like we needed Christ as the foundation for our marriage, and FBC Tifton did that for us.
That's
and
awesome.
so it
That's
was
awesome.
really cool. But we were kind of exploring, like, all right, what would long-term missions look like? So we were kind of applying to like Samaritan's Purse and other mission sending agencies. And we kept getting like denied, or not right now. There would always be choosing someone else and stuff. And so we kind of asked like...
Which is crazy. Let me interject because if I'm not mistaken, like the North American Mission Board, International Mission Board, like has been in the process of like needing missionaries, right? Like they're like people aren't people aren't going in a sense in the way that we've been commanded. So
That's right.
the fact that you were getting rejected is kind of crazy to me, right?
A little bit. I would say back in 2012, it was a little bit different than the feel that we're feeling now. In 2012, everyone was kind of like happy and set. And I think maybe there were some financial issues with some of the sending agencies and weren't really this strong push that we see now.
I got you. Okay.
So, but they were kind of slowly hiring and recruiting missionaries and stuff. So, and we just kind of kept getting rejected. And it came down to like, people, these agencies were looking for experience or some type of Christian education.
Right.
And so we had neither of those. We had some short-term mission trips, but no like real grasp, experience. So we started praying about it. It was like, what would it look like for us to have theological education? Or is that something, Lord, that you want us to go towards? And so I remember I went up there and visited the school. God made it very clear, all right, this is the next step. It wasn't like a voice spoken from heaven, but it was just kind of like, all right, this is going to be a long, drawn-out process, but I just need you to trust me and just be faithful through the process.
Now, what seminary did you go to?
I went to Louisville, or Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
I went up there, got a missions degree. While we were up there, we had 2 kids, Rayford and Rance. And so during that process, as I was also getting my missions degree, we started interviewing with the International Mission Board.
Can I back you up for just a second?
Absolutely.
And here's the reason why.
Yeah.
I remember a phone call when you were. Do you remember this phone call?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's an important part that I left out.
It is because I think people think sometimes that God has called me to something, so I'm going to blink, and it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz idea, right? Like just click your heels together and say there's no place like home. It's like, or click your heels together and say, God called me to Zimbabwe. And it's this easy process, and all of a sudden I'm on the mission field. But you surrendered to the theological education and training, and I'm not advocating that you have to be theologically trained to be a missionary. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But for
here.
you, that's what you felt like you were. I mean, that was the call, right?
Absolutely.
To go through the theological training. But in the process, you got a job at, was it FedEx or UPS?
At UPS.
Okay, so it was UPS.
Yeah.
And it was grueling.
Yes.
Like the hours and the time and the educational aspect was like, it was no easy thing for you to be like dad, husband, UPS, and full-time student.
Yes, that's right. So at that time, I wasn't dad yet, but it was in the process.
Right.
But the point is, like, I knew it had to be God's call. And I remember Wayne Rowe actually sat me down, like, you need to be like 100% certain, like, God is calling you to this. And I remember being like,
he tells other people, like, if you can do anything else and be happy, do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember he told me that if you can do anything else, like, man, do that. Like, if you can farm, like, do that. Yeah. And I remember, like, I was like, Lord, if you want me to farm, like, if I would love to sit down and settle down and, like, buy a house. And, like, Tifton is awesome. But it was just, like, this unsettledness, not this peace. And I knew it was him calling because, man, like, I'm just not like your typical seminary student. Like, I went to ABAC for a reason because it's hands-on. Sure. And man, reading for me is just like in the seminary, that's all it is.
That's all you
reading
do. Literally
and writing papers.
Write papers. Yeah.
And that's like my weakest thing. I was like, Lord, if you want this to happen, you're going to have to do it literally because this is not me. But I feel like this is one thing that you were making clear for us. And he got us through it.
That's awesome.
Now, it wasn't easy, but he got us through it by God's grace.
So you're telling me, Trey, that God could call you to something that would be difficult outside of your expertise, outside of your comfort zone, and outside of what you feel like was beyond your intellectual capabilities of what your perspective was for your life?
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Man, I
I love it.
Kind of looking back, we'll talk more about Zimbabwe in a little bit.
Yeah.
Zimbabwe's tough, but there were some days that I felt like seminary was tougher.
Wow.
Just because, it wasn't in my gifting, but I think sometimes we use that as an excuse, like, man, it's not in my gifting, so God's not calling me to that. And I think we need to walk that carefully. And, sometimes we put God in a box and say, well, he can do this, but he can't do this.
Sure.
But I don't think that people are saying, like, well, I have no gifting in this. I think we have to prayerfully go through that. I'm not saying that everyone has to go to seminary, because I see brothers and sisters in Christ all the time serving God faithfully without a seminary education, and God is using them in remarkable ways.
Yeah, but I can see what you're saying, how someone could use it's not my gift to, it's not my gift to do this aspect of the larger call. So, I'm only called to the things I'm really good at. Like that's not who we want to be. That would be the cop out, right? Like,
that's exactly
I
right.
really love bass fishing, so God must be calling me to be a tournament bass fisherman. It's like, maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
That's cool.
And I prayed through that too. It's like, God, are you calling me to be a professional duck hunter? Because I would love that. But
for sure.
he didn't. So
yeah. So at that point, then you and Caitlin are in seminary,
Yes.
and I say that intentionally, you and Caitlin, because it is,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
It was just as much her as me
when I
too.
was going through school, it was like, if she was doing nothing else, she was praying for my sanity. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So for you, take me up to the point to where you're wrapping up seminary,
Yes.
finishing all things Louisville, and then what?
Yeah. So we are finishing up, but through that whole process, I would say before I graduated, we were kind of in with the International Mission Board, and their interview process is intense. I mean, they got to know us more than my mom knows me.
Okay.
And my mom knows me a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you tell everybody listening what the International Mission Board is?
Yes, International Mission Board is mission sending agency through the Southern Baptist Convention.
Okay.
One little thing that I'll say, like a lot of times around Christmas time, you might hear the word Lottie Moon Christmas offering. And Lottie Moon was a really cool missionary lady and Baptist lover. And so around that time, you'll be hearing of offerings, and that offering goes to serving International Mission Board missionaries. And
Am I right that it's that offering specifically, the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, that offering specifically, 100% of it goes to boots on the ground?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so it doesn't go to like administrative fees or some home office lights being on here in the States.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So, because I wanted to know that too. And so that's what I found out as well. It keeps missionaries on the field.
Awesome.
And so it goes to logistical needs. It goes to like our house, our vehicle, our medical care, all of those things. Caitlin was able to have Lawton, our 1-year-old, in South Africa, and was really amazing, all thanks to Lottie Moon Christmas offering. So thank you all for that.
Yeah, that's definitely a plug. If you're a part of, now, I know that some of you listen and you don't even go to church, which is totally fine. I want you to keep listening. I love that you listen.
Yeah.
Some of you go to non-denominational churches, and I pray that you would give to and be a part of missions in your church. But specifically, so if you go to a Southern Baptist church, you will hear about the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. So you could give to that in confidence around Christmas time that your money's actually going to people like Trey and Caitlin, who are on the ground in other countries doing the work of the gospel.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so you're in Louisville. God's working on this call in your heart.
Yes.
And then tell me, so I interrupted you on the IMB thing. So jump back in to where you were. You started having conversations with the IMB.
That's right.
Awesome.
That's right. So it was a long process, and they really want to be invested in who they're bringing onto the field, because it's not an easy thing. You're going from America to a whole different culture, and it's a lot. And so if you have any kind of issues or sin issue, whether it be medical or sin, they want to find out those things, because they're putting in a lot of money, those Lottie Moon dollars, into taking you and your whole family. And so they're not just interviewing me, they're interviewing Caitlin, they'll interview our kids. Like, they want to make sure that your whole family is called to this place.
That's great.
And so they really take a lot of delicate time of working through things, working through issues, and making sure that you're taking this call very seriously. So I am thankful for that they really do take that interview process seriously. And for those that have that have not been able to go through, I would say we're thankful at the end, because, they were able to point out some real issues that they probably wouldn't have been able to deal with.
Discovered.
Discover, and God is able to use them in other places that they can completely see that it wasn't the right fit for them. So they're trying to weed out who's really called and who's really not.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So So here we are. You're talking with the IMB. They're vetting you. That's what we'll call it, I guess, right? They're vetting you and your family, doing interviews. How does Zimbabwe get brought into the mix? Was there, and this is what I want to ask. I don't want to kind of jump through the story at any points. Did you have to go to language school or anything like that? What did the process leading up to Zimbabwe look like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did language school when we got on the field, but kind of coming into Zimbabwe. So we were interviewing with the International Mission Board, and we had said, listen, we don't feel called to a particular place, but we just want to go where there's a need. We have agricultural degrees and stuff. If you can use those, that's great. But if you can't, we just want to go to where there's a need for the gospel. And so that's
So you're like,
yeah.
You're like, we don't care if you send us to Peru or Pakistan or northern Japan.
Yeah.
Just send us anywhere.
I said, we have I feel like Lord is kind of leading our hearts to Africa a little bit.
Okay.
And I was like, but if there's not a need in Africa, we'll go wherever there's a need. And so little did I know. So we got to rewind.
Wild, man.
Our story is crazy. So we've got to go back a little bit. So during that time at seminary was great, but I couldn't have done it without a local church.
Sure.
They're the ones that really poured into me during that time as well. And the church was a way that I was able to kind of flesh out what I was learning at seminary. And so I attended a small country church up in Louisville, Kentucky, just kind of on the outside of the city, called Redemption Hill Baptist Church. And that's where I was able to do kind of a pastoral intern. And the pastor there at the time was pouring into me. We clicked really great and were able to work through a lot of stuff, and he taught me a lot. Well, him and his family were called to the mission field, and they went to Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And so he's serving there in Zimbabwe and is doing theological education. That's kind of his main thing. He's kind of revamping a seminary that was kind of started by the International Mission Board a long time ago, but International Mission Board pulled out some around in the 90s or 2000s. And Nick Moore, who is the employee of the International Mission Board, him and his family went there to kind of help revitalize the seminary.
Cool.
During that time, he was learning that, the seminary would do really well and ministry would be going really well in Zimbabwe as long as funds from the states were coming in. Whenever the funds would stop, ministry would stop.
Wow.
And so he wanted to see a way that continued moving forward. So during his time there, he wrote a job description saying, we need someone here that can be doing agricultural ministry with the seminary to help sustain the seminary, but also to be training pastors that are there that can take these agricultural projects back to their rural areas and help sustain their ministries and their families.
Awesome.
And to use it as a way to use as a door to get into communities for gospel evangelism and church planting.
Yeah, so it's like the Paul tent making model, really. In a sense, it's like we want to be able to fund the ministry ourselves, so that if all money dries up, even if all money dried up completely from American mission sending agencies, we could be able to function and send people out.
That's exactly
amazing.
right. That's exactly right. So there was a couple of reasons for sometimes giving wouldn't continue. Sometimes there would be mismanagement of funds from corrupt leaders or things like that, and so people don't want to be giving to that. But if we can have something that's generating revenue in the country that's hands-on right there and no one gets their share into their pockets, that was kind of a way. And the seminary sits on 200 acres of land. So there's lots of land to be able to use for these agricultural things. So he wrote a job description saying, we need someone to help do these, because he's like, I'm not an agricultural guy. And so this was brought to our attention, and we're like, man, so we prayed a lot about it, and we really felt the Lord was saying, this is where I want you.
That's awesome.
To use your agricultural stuff. But at the end of the day, agriculture doesn't save people, the gospel does. So we're using that completely as a door just to use it for pastoral training, for discipleship, and for church planting.
Awesome. So this is what I love. Your story. You're a kid from America at ABAC, which if those of you that don't listen, that don't know ABAC, it's a very southern school, very country school. All right. I think the slogan is "Yeehaw, yeehaw, yay backers. I don't know. It's very Southern, very country, and like in the middle of that, God takes you on this journey, like gives you these skills, these agriculture skills that in your mind at the moment, you're like, I am going to a chemical company or farming or whatever. Like your family's future is the primary point of your thought process in agriculture to start with. And God takes you from a small school in Georgia, and now you're leading, serving, operating in a ministry in Zimbabwe to help people be self-sustaining so that the gospel can reach the ends of the earth.
No, that's exactly right.
What's amazing to me and what I really want people to hear, and one of the reasons when we were able to talk about you coming back in and y'all having some time here, is because we do think it has to be, this person that's got a particular set of skills, or that's got, God's looking for the charismatic public speaker, or he's looking for the super talented musician with a pretty voice, or you know what I'm saying, or he's looking for the influencer. And what I love is that it's what you said earlier, the ordinary, the common, which I mean, like, I can't farm, right? Like I like to ride a tractor and pretend like I can farm with our deer stuff, like our deer hunting stuff. But like the ordinary everyday skills and tasks that are, in my mind, pretty complex, when it comes to understanding the things that you do about farming and agriculture. It's those things. It's everything. Every vocation has an opportunity to be an avenue to share the gospel.
That's right.
And we forget that as a church, and especially American Christianity, we've kept church in the four walls of the buildings that we call churches, right? Like we haven't allowed it to permeate into our, whether we're doctors or nurses or clerks or mechanics or whatever. But like what you're saying, and I hope what you're picking up if you're listening today, is that if you're a mechanic and you change oils, what Trey's saying is that you change oil to the best of your ability so that in changing oil, you can shine the gospel and hopefully share the gospel.
That's exactly right.
So it doesn't matter your vocation. If you're a doctor, if you're a heart surgeon, right? Like if you're a neurosurgeon, like you're rerouting pathways of brains and reconnecting tissue, but ultimately you're doing that so that God would open a door for you to share the gospel.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
No, that's exactly right. And, in John chapter 15, he talks about the parable of the vineyard and the vine. And, that's what I also want to just share with all of y'all who are listening. Whether you're called, like, I'm not saying in order to be faithful, you have to go to Zimbabwe. It's just like TJ was saying, like being faithful with whatever God has given you and where you're at. Like, do that for the glory of Him. And the best way that you can do that is abide in Him. Like Christ continues to say, abide in me and I will abide in you. Yeah. And it's the work that He's going to do through you. There were so many times in Zimbabwe, like your culture shock, new place, new time. There's so many times I'm like, God, I have no clue what I'm doing, or I have no clue how to handle this situation. Like, this is way out of my box. Like, you're gonna, and like,
can you give an example of one of those situations, or some of those?
Yeah. So I would just like, there were times of just like, let's see, just cultural issues of trying to think of a specific. There would be times where street kids would be coming to our house and saying like, hey, we have no food, have no anything. And so like, you're trying to figure out, like, we've been warned several times, like there's just a lot of people trying to take advantage of you.
Sure.
And so
now when you say street kid, unpack that for me. Is that homeless kids?
Homeless kids on the street, orphans. And so, but a lot of times they're really just into drugs, and like they have parents. It's just a made up lie. And so we're constantly told that by pastors and everyone that's tried to help these kids. But there were several times where like we would just have to pray, like, Lord, you just got to show us, like, this is too tricky. Yeah. But one cool thing was there was this one time this kid came up to us and like the pastor was like, man, he's just pulling y'all's leg. We prayed about it and we were like, how can we help you? And like, he had been thrown out by his mom and was doing all this. And we were able to call his mom. His mom was able to come, and we were able to share the gospel with them. and they like both got saved, and like it was
awesome.
and so it was like really
Yeah.
amazing, like just
Yeah.
how like, but like you just don't know how to handle those situations.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a poor example, but
No, I think
it's
that's
just,
I think that's a perfect
yeah,
example.
it's just like there was constant like these things like, man, I don't really know how to handle this, or these agricultural things like, man, I don't know what to do. Like, but God was continually faithful. One crazy thing was like there was one time the monkeys were just like coming in and destroying our maize, and I was like, Lord, like I have no clue how to handle all
So
these
maize
monkeys.
is kind of like a grain,
Yeah, it's
sorghum
yeah,
kind of?
it's corn.
Okay,
basically.
corn.
So we were growing corn at the seminary, and so I started praying. I was like, Lord, like you got to do something about these monkeys. Well, then like 2 days later, I hear there's like, hey, Baba Trey, did you hear that there's a leopard on the place? A leopard was driving out
So
those
the leopard
monkeys.
was eating the
so
monkeys.
So you got to be careful what you pray for. You might
my
get
God.
a leopard. But it was just continuing to show like God's faithful through all the things that we don't know how to handle. And so we're continually showed like His grace and His mercy. But what I want to get back to is just abiding in Him is like the only way that we can truly reproduce fruit. Whether it's fruit in the Spirit or fruit of like many people coming to know Jesus. You know, people debate on which one that one is, but whether it is like it's you abiding in Him and Him abiding in you is the only way that we can truly have fruit. And so whether you're in Africa, whether you're a mechanic, or whether you're in school, wherever you're doing, or if you're a stay-at-home mom, like continue to abide in Christ. Just in loving Him, seeking Him, continuing. That's the only way that we can like truly know what obedience is going to look like.
Absolutely. And not just for the sake of, and this is one thing that I wanted to ask you about, not just for the sake of producing the fruit, but keeping you
absolutely
in the season, because you and Caitlin, you guys, you birthed a child overseas.
Yes.
But not only that, during COVID, you were completely isolated from even the opportunity to come home.
Yeah.
And during that season, Caitlin lost her mom.
That's exactly right.
So tell us a little bit about, because again, I don't want to. We're not just here to romanticize missions. The cost of missions is high, and your family has paid that price. And what I keep I love that you shared you're abiding in Jesus on the front end, because it's not like, hey, our story's been rosy and perfect and everything was good and we fly back and forth to America and we still have the comforts of home. Like you moved your whole family and you've been in uncomfortable situations for the glory of God, and you've suffered great hurt in a lot of ways on the mission field. But what you're telling me is that abiding in Christ is so good to you and to your family that you would rather abide in Christ than experience the comforts of America and being outside of the will of God for you and your family. So tell us a little bit about, if you will, just being separated from family during that time and that grief and walking through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to that verse, talking about that, because he also says those that don't produce fruit, they break off from the vine and they're thrown away into the fire. And like, you're exactly right in what you said of that he keeps you.
Yeah.
And through that, man, He kept us. I've never faced sadness the way that I've faced, and just loneliness. But and Caitlin would say the same thing. We still face that. We still, as we're back in the States, we're reminded of all the times that we're not with her mom and the kids asking us about grandma, where's grandma? And just kind of all the sacrifices, we can look back and just say, man, He's worth it because He's been faithful through all of it. It's the only thing that has been our true joy. And I can't describe that. I can't explain that. Yes, it was we experienced some of our lowest lows that we've ever had in our life. But Christ was the only thing that was able to really help us to get through it. I do want to brag about all the things that God's doing in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
I want to brag about, but I also want to just say, we shouldn't have made it we shouldn't have made it healthy out of the mission field. We should have come home rattled and torn and said, we're done. we're not going back. And, we also lost some dear teammates at the time. The guy that I was telling you about, Nick, him and his family had to come back, and we supported them going back 100%. But we felt alone. We felt lonely. And it was during that time that, like, we lost Caitlin's mom. We had a newborn baby, and we're kind of right in the middle, in the thick of everything. And God was like showing us, like, I'm all you got. And He was enough. He was more than enough. And I'm telling you, so
that's
like,
awesome.
It was hard, but like, God is the only way we were able to get through it.
Right.
Like, we had every reason possible to say, like, no, like, we're done. Like, this is too much. There were several times I was ready to, and there was times I told Caitlin, like, I can't do this anymore. I can't continue on. Like, I cannot continue on. And Caitlin would kindly tell me, like, don't tell me that, tell God that. And, it was just like, and I would tell God, and He would convict my heart and be like, who do you think you are?
Yeah, sure.
And convict me, and it would always bring me back to Him.
Sure.
And always bring me back to where I'm not looking inward and looking outward. And He's the only reason that we're able to serve faithfully on the field.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you guys are home now for...
Yeah, it's kind of like a sabbatical.
Okay.
International missionaries, mission board missionaries say, like, it's stateside assignment.
Okay.
But we're here for 6 months. We'll go back to Zimbabwe in January 2023.
Okay. So you'll be here for 6 months, and this is just a time for you to see family, to connect, to be poured back into. So here's a question: how did you launched ministry, building the farm?
Yes.
We'll just say it that way, right?
Yeah,
You're growing
yeah.
maize. You're teaching people how to farm, how to fertilize, how to take care of whatever pests you guys have in Zimbabwe, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so you're navigating that. Excuse me. When you left it, what did you feel like? Because you were there. Y'all been there how many years?
We've been there for 3.5 years.
So in 3.5 years, what have you seen happen? Like, what's the transformation?
Yeah.
Just give me a snapshot, if you will, of the
Okay,
transformation
yeah, so-
and what you're going back to.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing the International Mission Board did want us to do for the first year that we were there was just really learning the language and learning the culture.
Okay.
So we spent a week or a few days and a few nights in a village just not long after we got there. I mean, in the first week that we were there, we went into a village and stayed with the village head, and just were able to learn about the culture, the customs, the food, and just kind of the way of life. And so we were able to learn a lot. And then through that kind of first year when COVID hit, we really just kind of took that time to focus on language, because we weren't really able to do a kind of whole lot when it was really locked down.
Sure.
So we just focused on learning language. The language there in Zimbabwe is Shona. Now, the trade language is English.
Okay.
So it was established by the British way back in the day. And so the trade language there still is English. That's what's taught in schools and stuff.
Okay.
But the heart language is Shona. And it's a beautiful language. It's got a lot of vowels, and it kind of sounds like stuff from The Lion King. And,
Very cool.
It's really cool. So we learned that. I wouldn't say that we're like 100% fluent, because English is spoken so well there. But we know enough to, talk to someone for 10 minutes and just kind of do the introductories. But if two people are talking back and forth, it can get over my head real quick. Yeah. So by God's grace, like, we're able to get in a decent area into the language, just to kind of use as a barrier to break down. Just when we start speaking their language, their eyes just like open up, and they're just amazed that we've taken that time to learn their language when you can easily just speak in English.
Yeah, because that shows an
everywhere.
investment on your part, right? Like, I'm not just here to get something from you. Like, I've spent my time in my life to be a part of your culture and to understand at least understand a part of it from a
That's
language
right.
perspective.
That's right. So
you'll be here for 6 months. You're learning the language. Y'all spent that time learning the language.
Yeah.
What's the farm look like? Like, what did go from to what it is now?
yeah, so it was original. So there was some projects started kind of before we got there. There was a big chicken project that was started at the seminary, and we kind of came into that as it was beginning. And so we've made some changes. It originally started with 4,000 chickens that were just laying chickens. And so it originally started that the students were supposed to run the chickens.
Okay.
So kind of like what you had talked about earlier, how I was able to kind of be able to get through seminary was I worked at UPS and was able to work, and they paid half and then paid half of my education as well.
Okay.
And so they would help pay my tuition fees. It's kind of the idea that we had with the farm. A lot of these pastors from the rural areas aren't able to pay for their fees at the seminary and stuff, so they would come and work alongside the farm. And so what we ended up doing was reducing that to about 600 chickens. And so that way we could have one person responsible, like a manager that's there full time. And we found someone that was very trustworthy in the community to run that 600 chickens, but then also to kind of diversify. And we've got goats, pigs, turkeys, and all kinds of stuff that we're diversifying quite a bit. That's a little bit smaller project. So that way, if we're only focusing on chickens, like someone that's going back to this area, chickens might not do well. So we wanted to do kind of more smaller stuff that pastors could take back to, if chickens are not doing well, maize and soybeans and ground nuts and maybe goats would do really well there, or pigs. And so those are the things that we had kind of focused on during that time. Kind of leading up into that, when we first came in, we had built some good relationships, but it was kind of like, okay, you do it and, you do your thing. But we were able finally to get the seminary to have ownership over these projects. Sure. And Caitlin really helped with that. There was something about Caitlin had just like a softness and a sweetness about her that
She's
they just
sweetheart,
loved.
man.
She is
People
so
love
sweet.
her. Yeah.
And so I
People
got
love
along.
you too, but
exactly. You know what I mean? So I got along with the staff at the seminary, but when Caitlin started coming in and kind of explaining the importance of all this, they really got on board. And so what was awesome was you could tell that they're really starting to get on board with these projects.
That's awesome.
And when we had to leave to go to South Africa to have Lawton, and then when Caitlin's mom died unexpectedly and we had to go back to the States, we were away from the seminary for more than 3 months. And so before that, if that would have happened, everything would have probably fallen apart because it was just kind of me and Caitlin running the show and kind of doing everything. But we were able to have people that kind of took ownership and stepped up and started seeing the benefits of these agricultural things at the seminary, that it helped sustain them.
Very cool.
And so they, the principal and the students there have really taken quite of ownership, and it's going well right now.
That's awesome.
Talk to the manager of the chicken house every day, and we talk, not every day, but every week, and we always talk about the things that are going on, and they're doing awesome.
Did y'all have a big barbecue or something? Because you went from 4,000 chickens to 400 chickens. It's like 3,600 meat chickens somewhere, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they typically have a 90-week lifespan.
Yeah.
And so when it came to that 90-week lifespan, what we did was we sold them all off in town.
Gotcha.
So typically a meat chicken will go for $6 to $8.
Yeah.
But an old rundown layer chicken that's at the end of its life will go for $3.
Gotcha.
So we sold all those, and then we used that money to reinvest into the farm.
That's
to
awesome.
Get 600 chickens, and also to kind of all of our seeds for the garden, for the fields in the back to plant.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we did.
That's awesome.
But a barbecue would have been awesome.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. I'm like, well, I mean, obviously you're like, no, we reinvested that, dummy, right? So last couple things.
Yeah.
You guys are here for just a few more months, and then you're back on the field. You'll be on the field at that point. Will y'all stay for 4 years? Is it 4 years without a furlough?
About 3.5, but 3.5 to 4 years.
3.5 to 4 years.
Yeah.
For people listening who are praying people who might want to pray for you guys, going back, what are some things that we could partner with you to pray for you guys? So here's just kind of a two-part question. One, what are some things that we could, those of us that are listening that are praying people and our church, what could we pray for you? And two, if people want to know more about you guys, and I know there's a newsletter, right? So would you tell us, one, what we could be praying? And then before we go, just let everybody know how they could follow along with y'all's story and your projects and those kinds of things that they could see and follow along with. Just let everybody know.
Yeah, absolutely. one thing that when we left the field, Lord put this on my heart and put it on Caitlin's heart separately, was discipleship.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. That's what it started in Tifton, was discipleship.
Sure.
And leaving Zimbabwe, we did a lot of agricultural stuff. We did some evangelism. We saw some church planting and stuff happening. And the churches there are doing a great job of doing evangelism and church planting. But discipleship is really the missing key. And so kind of before Caitlin and I left, Caitlin took a small group of girls and really poured into their lives. And I took a small group of men and poured into their lives. And so like Lord left that as just a burden onto our hearts that when we come back, we really want an emphasis on just discipleship and then also healthy church.
Yeah.
There's so many things that can easily infiltrate the churches here in America and also especially in Africa.
Sure.
And so those are the two things that we're really have been praying about this stateside, and would love for y'all to continue to pray just as we go back of how to best work in discipleship and healthy church into our ministry that we're doing with agriculture.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So discipleship and healthy church.
Yeah.
Man,
Exactly right.
Yeah, we would love to partner in prayer with you. And now, as we go, first of all, let me just say thank you, man.
Yeah.
Thank you for hanging out with us. Thank you for sharing a part of your story. We could talk for hours about all that God has done and is doing, but I'll say this from sitting here in Tifton, seeing God take you through ABAC or from ABAC into seminary and from seminary to Africa, just what God has done in your life. It's been a joy to look in on and see your and Caitlin's faithfulness to the glory of God and to the mission of God. So thank you, man, for following Jesus. You are one of those people that you would never say this, but you're one of those people that you could say to the world, like, follow me as I follow Christ. And people would benefit from following that example to say yes to Jesus. So I'm grateful for the opportunity as a church and as somebody that knows you personally to be able to look in on that. But tell everybody before we go, how can we follow along with your story, get updates, all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Caitlin's email, I need to have Caitlin on the show she handles kind of the newsletter and everything, but we do have a newsletter, and that's kind of typically how we stay in touch with everybody. So if you email Caitlin at kkrlancaster@gmail.com, she can just say, hey, I want to get signed up for the newsletter. She'll get you signed up, and just also when you email her, she'll see that email address. And if that's the email address you want to be where the newsletter is sent to your email, just let her know that.
All right. Tell them how to spell Lancaster real quick.
Okay. So KKRLANCASTER@gmail.com.
Awesome. I hope y'all got that. I hope you're right now pulling up your phone while you're listening to this so you can email Caitlin and get on the newsletter.
Yeah,
listen,
absolutely.
Trey, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you guys.
You guys are a blessing to us, and it's awesome to look in on your story and see all that God is doing.
Hey,
we appreciate you much, man.
Y'all are a blessing to us as well. Thank you so much for having us. It's a joy to be here.
Amen. All right. Listen, thanks so much for hanging out with us today and listening. If you want to know more, you heard the email, so sign up for it, get the newsletter, and find out what they do with the rest of those 600 chickens, all right? And what God is doing in their lives and how the gospel is advancing in Africa. Y'all be blessed. See you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the TJ Malden Leadership Podcast, where we talk about life, leadership, and the gospel. If you enjoyed this episode, share with a friend. For more content, follow us on Instagram and YouTube. If you have any questions you would like to ask TJ, whether it is about life, leadership, or the gospel, you can email those to tjmaldenleadershippodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we hope you join us again on the TJ Malden Leadership Podcast.